Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Wednesday, January 26th, 2022. Tonight's format, if you're new to these, is open forum, which means you could submit a question about anything related to therapy, therapeutic change, psychology, parenting, relationships, anything that is in and around those topics, and I'll be happy to address it. We have a few questions that have come in while we've been waiting to start, and we have one or two pre-submitted questions from last evening's broadcast, so I'm going to take them in the order they're received. You can submit them at any time. They'll be private. We won't show your name. The only person that will know who submitted it will be Malia, my moderator. And so we'll jump right into that. We'll get right into the questions. The first question reads, I had to place my eldest son into treatment after I was divorced, and my ex, not his biological father, refused to pay for treatment. I am working hard on resolving anger. Attended an intensive in October, so I have come to the point of being unable to really speak about my ex. Is that the right balance? How do I align with what you laid out yesterday and tell my kids, quote, I was hurt, so I'm not the best person to speak to you about your dad, as I do have a younger biological son from my ex? Wonderful question. Actually, I think the depth of the background in your question gives me an opportunity to speak to several things. The first thing I want to point out, which won't sound like I'm answering it directly, but it'll have broader application to everybody. I want to talk for just a moment about a boundary. One of my favorite quotes is the quote that says that a healthy boundary is the distance between me and you in which I can love me and you simultaneously. And recently, just in the last week, I read a quote that explained that when I set a boundary with you, I'm really inviting you into my life. I'm not necessarily wanting you out of my life. I'm showing you what I need to have in a relationship to allow you into my life. And when I've set difficult boundaries with family members and friends, what I've learned to know and even say to be helpful is to say, these are uncomfortable conversations for me when I don't say them out of anger, of course. These are uncomfortable conversations for me. And so the fact that I'm telling you means that I care enough to be uncomfortable and to take this risk. I love the idea of striking while the iron is cold. Also, that's something I've learned is that when people are upregulated, when they're likely to have a defensive response to a boundary or to feedback, that's the time to relax a little bit and to get curious, to slow down and to be gentle and wait for an opening, wait for the nervous system in the other person to down regulate some so they're not on guard, it's not a vulnerable moment where they're likely to be traumatized or triggered. That's some background. That's not really your question. You're not talking about boundaries. But I think you're speaking to this idea that you can't talk about your ex and that there's still a lot of hurt and anger and pain in there. The first thing I would say to you is I don't judge that. I mean, you can if you want to. I imagine that might be part of your question. But I want you to hear that I don't judge that. That's just where you are. And sometimes that's the least that we can do is to say nothing or to not talk about it or to not talk about him, in this case, your ex. And also setting the boundary with your children, saying, I'm not the best person to talk about. There are still feelings there. I think that's okay. That's you showing and taking ownership of it. And yes, it's every child's fantasy that their parents would get along and love each other effusively and freely, but that's just not the way that the world works. And so showing your child that you're maintaining healthy psychological boundaries, healthy boundaries with them, and still owning and being authentic that there's pain or hurt or anger inside of there might be the best model I can think of giving to somebody. You're showing them how to deal with feelings that are uncomfortable and that are difficult without acting out and hurting other people. Back to the broader question, one of my favorite concepts is that if we show up to a relationship, if we stick in relationships, if we do things in relationship, if we show up to a conversation when we're not ready to, but we do it because we think we should, it's the right thing to do, inevitably, we're going to end up being unkind and abusive to the other person, or we're going to have to discard, repress, subjugate, minimize some part of ourself that's really important and core. And I think people, because of judgments, because there's so much should swirling around in the universe and inside of our heads, I think so many people would try to figure out the right thing to do. What I love about your question and what you've described is that you've done your work. You're doing your work. But this is what you can do right now. And yes, is it less than idyllic? Is it less than nirvana and this utopian society relationship that you could have with your ex? Of course it is, but that's a human condition. That's part of the human condition. So I would just honor where you're at. I think the only way to move through and let go of anger is to honor it. I still, as you know, I'm a big fan of people doing their work in whatever ways they find emotional growth and healing and evolving and learning and growing. Whatever way you find that, I'm supportive of. My way is therapy. I like 12-step support group meetings. So those are my preference, but there are other ways. There's prayer, meditation, yoga. There's, people can listen to a teacher, listen to podcasts, to read self-help books, whatever works for you, works for you. And more than anything else, it's almost like I planted this question because I think it's so rich and subtle and deep. You're at that place. You're doing the best you can. You're trying not to leak. You're trying not to lash out. You're trying not to be unkind to him, so you don't. It's. I know this is a cliche because it's been around forever. It was in the movie Bambi. There's an old saying, of course, that if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And in this situation, I think that really applies. You're not. If you can't talk, you can't talk. If you can't talk without leaking, you can't talk without leaking. And if you need to set boundaries with your children or with anybody around talking about your ex, I think that's perfectly okay. One of the things that surprised me in my own evolution and growth is I thought when I left a high cost a religion that required a lot and had a lot of rules and had some there were just a lot of rules for membership. When I left that religion, I thought that I was leaving shame and guilt behind. I had conflated the two. I'd assumed that the majority of my shame and my guilt were coming from that place. And what I learned is that shame and guilt followed me. They took off the priesthood clothing, if you will. They took off the religious clothing and they put on Sigmund Freud's suit, Carl Jung's suit, D.W. Winnicott's suit, right? These masters. And so I started thinking about should and shouldn't in terms of psychology. Like I should be able to do this and I should be able to talk to my husband and I should say something nice about him to my children if I'm using your example. And what I've learned, of course, through my own work, my continued work, is that there's no should in psychology, in my opinion. In good psychology, in good healing, in good treatment, there's no should. There's a mindfulness, an awareness, an observation, a kindness, a love, a compassion, a non-judgment, a curiosity, a learning, a courage. There's all these wonderful things, but there's no should. And that's why sometimes, for example, when people say, I try to practice gratitude, that doesn't hit me right. Because for me, gratitude comes out of embracing all of my feelings instead of trying to focus on a feeling that I've been taught is the better or the good feeling to feel. If you feel anger, if you feel hurt, there's a reason for it. If I was your psychotherapist, I wouldn't try to get you to not feel angry toward your ex. I would try to understand, deeply connect to the pain that led to the anger that you're feeling. And in so doing that, in that process, theoretically, you would feel it more because it's a safe place. And in feeling it, you would move through it. There's a saying that I read this week also that says, the only way through pain is through pain, through the pain. The way through pain is through the pain. And that what that means is that we have to feel our uncomfortable, unpleasant emotions to allow them to move through us or for us to move through them. So, beautiful question. Wonderful. I wish you all the love and compassion as you continue to do your work and to heal. And I think you have a really good grasp of things. So thanks for submitting that. Next question reads, can you talk about the role of drug testing when kids return home? When I was younger, I was 100% pro drug testing. And it wasn't just from the aspect of playing cops and robbers with your children. I thought it gave them a clear message. I also thought that it gave them another reason, another excuse to lean on when they might be pressured or feel vulnerable to say, I'm going to be tested. I've told this story before, but it bears telling again because there's always new audience members listening. I had a woman years ago come to a meeting in one of the cities we were visiting when we were doing in-person parent support groups, which we will do again once the pandemic eases significantly. I was meeting with somebody, and somebody shared that they had been asked by their young adult child to be drug tested during their next home visit from a treatment program, from a long-term extended care treatment program. And I thought that was, a sign of maturity. That this young adult had come home previously on a previous home visit and relapsed, but was allowed back into the program after the home visit because they showed a commitment. And this relapse was more of a lapse than it was a complete relapse into old thinking patterns. Right? They were still committed to it. They wanted to still work on their sobriety, work on their recovery. So this young adult was asking this mother for drug testing. Another reason, another excuse, another support. Maybe even to signal to the mother. In fact, I'm kind of, as I think about it now, I'm kind of suspicious of this, to signal to the mother about how committed they were to sobriety. Regardless of what was going on with the young adult, the mother said in this group, and I told my child no. I told them I'm not going to drug test them, and that hit me, and I was waiting, but ready to say something like, it really can't help them. She's asking for it. But then the mother followed up her statement about that she wasn't going to test the child with something that was irrefutable, something that I think there's no argument against. She said, I told my daughter no, and I gave her the reason that if I start testing you, there's a chance that I will relapse. That my codependent thinking about being in charge of your recovery, being able to fix you, being the one that really is the determining factor about whether or not you're going to be okay in the world, I will get triggered in those ways. And that thinking, that problematic thinking is my disorder, is my disease, is my mental health issue. So I'm not willing to put that at risk. If I see it, if I smell it, if you show up, intoxicated or high, I'm going to address it. I'm not going to stick my head in the sand, but I'm not going to go out of my way and take responsibility for your sobriety. That's up to you. And really, that moment started to accelerate my evolution about it. I think drug testing can be a part of the process. It does send that message to the child that this is clearly something we're just not going to allow. But I don't think it's about zero tolerance. I think it's about having a backstop or a safety net. When I have drug tested my children, and I have 4, and 2 of them have been drug tested with some regularity, it's not about catching them. There's an energy about trying to catch them that I don't like. I don't want to be in. It's not good for my recovery. It's not good for my relationship with the child, frankly, which is not good for my recovery. But I do it. I've done it, and I'll do it again as a message that this is where I'm at. I'm not going to catch you every time. You might be able to get away with it once or twice. Eventually, it will catch up to you. I think about my first child who struggled with substance use and substance abuse. Went to treatment and is today more than 10 years sober. And then I contrast that with my second child of 4, my second child's story. And she kind of got away with the normal, typical stuff. Just this week, she was talking about something that she did in college, that she sold some textbooks to party. Maybe I shouldn't be telling the story about her because a lot of you know her, but she's not too shy about it. But she told me this and we laughed about it and I said, "I'm okay that you got away with it." It didn't show up in your school performance, it didn't show up in your relationships at home. You took care of your business. And frankly, you showed some balance. And the fact that you could get away with it to me was a sign that it wasn't a problem. And one last issue, back I mentioned zero tolerance. Zero tolerance just doesn't make sense anymore. That's not to say it's a strange, subtle, but clear line, if that can be possible. Subtle but clear. And I say this with my youngest. I'm not going to allow it. I'm not going to send you off at the first time I test you and you come up positive, but we're going to have a discussion. And if it continues, I'm going to do something about it. I'm not willing to sit here and let my children use under in my house or under my while I'm raising them while they're under 18. I'm not going to do it and stand by and do nothing if it becomes a pattern or a problem. And people might argue, well, that tells them that they can get away with it once or twice. And back to the story with my other child. Okay, healthy development for teens includes screwing up, making mistakes, and experimenting with life and what it means to be a person. So I like it in the context of this bigger philosophy that I'm describing. If it's about catching them, if it's about certainty, if it's about zero tolerance, if it triggers your own recovery or gets in the way of your relationship with them, you choose what's best given those circumstances. But it's not as simple as I thought it was when I was younger. I do it. I'll continue to do it. This last one is the last child that I'm raising in my home of the four, but I'll continue to do it. And it will be a part of what I hope is a flexible, creative, organic relationship and process with my child, our relationship, and raising her. So those are my thoughts about it. Thank you. Somebody asked the question, how does wilderness therapy work with kids on the autism spectrum? It is a classroom for social skills. The context of small group primitive nomadic living, which is Evoke's model, is a microcosm. It's like life, only more. It's like the volume of life is turned up. And so everything kind of comes to the surface. Who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses all become exposed. Who you are becomes exposed. And so for clients, for children on the spectrum, there's a great opportunity with this microcosm to teach about social skills, to teach about emotions, to even slow things down and de-emphasize what goes on in mainstream life with pressures and academic success, and how does autism spectrum disorder show up in the classroom. It's a great time to kind of remove some of those variables and focus on how is the child processing, what kind of accommodations do they need, what are the social skills and social skills training that they need, how are they, what's their level of awareness with regard to their own emotions and other people's emotions, how do they impact other people. It's just a great curriculum, a great classroom, a great structure to teach all the things that are helpful on the autism spectrum. It's also a great opportunity for assessment. And it's a great opportunity for the parents to take a step back, to stop doing the heavy lifting for, 8 to 12 weeks, and to learn about what works and what doesn't, to see how the child succeeds and struggles in small group living, and to learn from a distance, from a safe distance, what works and what you need to do more of, and also to get support. Anytime there's a difference, right? An addiction, a mental health issue, neurological differences, atypical neurology. Anytime there's a difference, not just different from mainstream, but different from you need extra support, extra education, extra emotional resources. So wilderness therapy, not to understate this part of it and to highlight this part of it, it's good for the parents too. To kind of structurally, not just psychologically, but structurally, you're differentiated, right? You're individuated structurally because they're out there and you're at home, and it starts off with letters and moves to phones and then maybe a visit. It's a very differentiated structure, right? That is a metaphor for the transition to young adulthood and to independent living. So with that respect, with that piece of it, it gives the parents time to see what they need, how they can get supported. I cannot tell you the number of parents who have gone to 12-step support groups and have said, well, it's not the same because my child's on the spectrum. They don't have an addiction issue or substance use issue, and they don't have a mental health issue in terms of depression, anxiety, and going down the typical things we think about when we think about mental health. But I've said, but you have somebody that's struggling, that at times is self-sabotaging, that isn't functioning well. And those things are similar. Yes, the origin of it might be just neurology versus substance use disorder or situational or state depression, where somebody's depressed. It might be different than those in the small brushstrokes and the small print, but it's similar enough for you to understand, how do I relate? What's my role with somebody who struggles like this? So it gives parents an opportunity also, and I don't think that can be overstated. Thank you. Somebody asks, my eldest is in treatment and doing really well and then they name the program. I have grown exponentially, but as we're not together, he can't see that change. What is the best way to dialogue about that change in a constructive way? I think vulnerable, authentic storytelling is appropriate. I love when parents are responding to children, especially in letters, but it also can work in real time if you're communicating on the phone or video chat or in person. I love for parents to share with a child, my old reaction was this, or how I used to react, or how my first instinct is to react this way. But because of what I'm learning, I'm going to react this way. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to get curious. I'm going to listen. I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a timeout. I'm going to consult with my sponsor, with my spouse, with my whomever, wherever you get the support. I think share with him honestly. Don't share anything that's raw that you haven't dealt with. Don't share things for the first time. Share something that you've gotten your emotional needs in that area with that topic addressed in therapy or some kind of support system. I think about it. I don't know if this will make sense. I've never said this in this format, I don't think. But when I think about psychotherapy, I think about, because I do a lot of self-disclosure. You know that if you listen or watch, I do that. I think about therapy like a pool of water, right? Water in storytelling and in dreams often represents unconscious because it perfectly mirrors the unconscious, right? We can see shapes and we can see, partial objects, but things are distorted and we can't see very far and we can't see very deep. It's just like the unconscious. I could describe water for 20 minutes and all that entire description would apply to both water and to the unconscious. So think about getting into a pool, and it's okay to get into the pool with your clients, with your children, with other people. It's okay to sit in it, to put your legs in it, to wade in it. And in some moments, I even find myself getting, up to my neck in it. But I don't go underwater. I remain conscious, intentional. I maintain what Daniel Siegel calls response flexibility, which means I'm choosing my response. I mean, I try to do all of that. Of course, anybody can be dysregulated and make mistakes. I do that also. But I'm talking about when I do it well. I stay above water. So stay above water, but tell them some of the stories. Check with a therapist if you're unsure about specific content or stories, you can be vague and protect content while still sharing your own parallel process. I'm a fan of self-disclosure, especially when he or she or they are away and you're communicating through letters or phone and it's pretty deliberate when you're communicating. I like it. Write a letter. Talk about what you're learning. Talk about what you don't know. Ask them questions. I love it when a parent, I've said this, I haven't said this in a long time. Peer pressure is a common complaint from parents. I love it when a parent admits that they're still grappling with peer pressure, that we still worry about what the neighbors think, how people perceive us. There's not many of us that can, for example, have a tantruming child in a grocery store that wouldn't feel the eyes on us, the judgment on us, the fear, the anxiety. There are some, but there's not a lot of us. There are a lot of us who worry about even the fact that our family is at a Voc or with a Voc or going through the process, or you've gone to an intensive or you go to AA or Al-Anon. I mean, that's real for all of us. I love it when a parent can say, look, I still struggle with peer pressure. Because what you often get back from the child is a lecture about peer pressure. But what most parents do? They lecture their kids about peer pressure. And they're usually almost all really poor lectures because they're uninsightful. They're not authentic. They're not real. They've got no depth to them. So, it's okay to share a little bit about your own struggles. Ask them for their thoughts and advice. Share them something you've learned. Even if it doesn't relate to your relationship with them, something you've learned at work and something that you're using, some of the skills, the new insights that you're using in other areas of your life can be really helpful. Those are some thoughts. Somebody writes, there are many times when my young adult son gets very angry about how crappy his life is, that it's so bad, that he shouldn't have to do anything until someone fixes him. If I say anything about how there is no fix until he chooses to do his work, meaning work with his therapist, take his medications as prescribed, and practice better self-care in general. When I say these things to him, he flies into a rage and verbally assaults me. He also destroys property and has physically assaulted me. So I often say nothing out of the fear about how he might respond. I'm gonna just, before I address the bulk of the content, it's not okay. Just so you know, if he's assaulting you verbally and physically, just verbally, you can separate yourself. You can call the police. Like there is no honor in taking abuse from somebody. That's not what I teach when I talk about containing and listening. I talk about listen when you can, as much as you can until you can't. So I just want to say, the idea that somebody's abusing you, I would empower you to take a really clear, strong stand about that. Don't, frankly, between me and you, just saying it this way, I don't care what he's feeling if it's being expressed as cruelty or abuse toward you or anybody else. That's not an abdication of the responsibility that we all have to work on ourselves. So having addressed that tiny little trigger that I just felt, I would say the way to engage him is to just listen. Don't be intrusive. Don't give him, when you tell him there's no fix until he chooses to work with his therapist, you're trying to fix him, right? Telling him there's no fix is trying to reason with him to fix him, trying to get him to go to his therapist and take his medications. I remember I've told this story, and sometimes my therapist tells very abstract stories. I think she's trying to tell the stories in such an abstract way that I can make the connections. But years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, she had come to speak at a conference that we were hosting. She's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And after the meeting where she taught, people had gathered around and were asking her questions and talking to her. And somebody said very, very casually, and I thought very honestly, said, I self-medicate in the evening using alcohol. I don't drink too much or get hungover, not do my job. My health is okay, but I drink to relax, to turn off my brain at the end of my workday, and it works in the evening. Problem is, I wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm more anxious than I was before I drank the evening before. And Jamie, my therapist, in her dry humor kind of way, said, I know the answer to this one. And everybody kind of paused because it was such a traumatic declaration. She said, I know what the answer to this is. And we're all like, good, this is going to be good for all of us to hear, both for ourselves and for the clients and the people that we work with. And she says, what I would do is I would take a bottle of whiskey. I would set it on your night table next to your bed. And when you wake up at 4, drink that until you go back to sleep. And everybody looked at Jamie like she was crazy. And I thought, I know what she's saying. She's saying, you can figure it out. This person worked in a therapeutic program. You can figure it out by meditating. You can figure it out by exercising. You can figure it out by going to therapy. And the list goes on and on and on in ways that she could practice self-care and deal with anxiety and so forth. And so the question wasn't really a question. Another way of answering it is she could have just said, it's really hard, isn't it? That's essentially what she was saying. Because her solution was so utterly ridiculous and absurd that was her point, is that it's hard. Life is hard. And when you work in high stress jobs where you have to think and deal with a lot of trauma, frankly, or you're dealing with you're juggling a lot of balls in your life, you're going to feel that way. And drinking at the end of the day will temporarily solve that, but you haven't solved anything. And so what this requires of you, back to this question, to listen when you can and then walk away when you can't. And don't give suggestions or answers or ideas unless he asks you 10 times in a row. You know? As a therapist, you learn to get a sense when somebody's nervous system is downregulated, when the guard is down, when they feel safe, when there's an opening, and you offer ideas. You don't give advice, hopefully, but you offer ideas. This is what's worked for me, or you might try this, or what about this? And you're ready that if the client rejects it, you drop it immediately, and you agree with them at how stupid your suggestion was. But you're kind of paying attention to that. So listen. Don't fall into the trap. It's just more like he's just telling you how difficult and painful and what a struggle his life is. Just listen to that. And if you need to walk away, walk away. And if he abuses you, I really would like to empower you to do something to set a boundary, which would include up to, if you decide, to having him removed from the home. It's just, don't let your empathy rob you of what you need, of your boundaries. And we codependent people, we anxious people, we parents can sometimes let our empathy overpower us and allow us to compromise and sacrifice things that we need for ourselves. So I'm giving you permission to take care of yourself. Somebody writes, how do we keep our hearts open with the kids that are engaged in self-harm and suicidal? I find myself bracing, shutting down to safeguard my heart. But I know this won't really protect either of us. Just further disconnection and hopelessness. Trying to stay connected and having faith in my kid will, with supports, find their way back. But it's tough to be moved by love instead of driven by fear. I'll speak personally. I'm pretty good with self-harm. When my children have self-harm, I've become capable of sitting with that. Suicidality, that's the end of the game. There's no coming back. There's no lesson learned from that on the person who does it. So that's a big one. Get support. Talk to a therapist or support group members as much as you need to. as often as you need to. Remember this, folks. I want to tell you, those of you who don't know it, there are folks, and these aren't just a few. There are, I would guess, hundreds of thousands of people that fit into this category worldwide who have been 2 decades or more sober, who go to several meetings a week as part of their program to stay sober. We don't go to these places to just learn skills and get new tools and have the mysteries of the universe unfolded to us by some wise therapist. We go there. It's Joseph Campbell said, our sacred space is the place that we go to find ourselves again and again. So get support, get support, get support, get support. That's the thing to do. Because I don't know how a parent learns to respond even keeled to a suicide threat. Again, self-harm, I think that you can get there. You can realize the function of that symptom, what it's trying to provoke or evoke in others, where it comes from. If it doesn't rise to the level of life-threatening, that can be learned. I've learned that as a therapist and a father. But suicidality is it's too big. You have to go to places and talk to people who have been through it. Maybe even in situations where it's been completed, meaning the person has taken their own life. And you have to grieve and feel and cry and complain and rage and whatever you need to do as often as you need to do it. Remember, therapy isn't, I just think I think people think therapy is about education or new information. I don't think it is that. That's just a part of it. It's about a re-experiencing of yourself. It's about getting grounded. It's about lowering your nervous system responses by moving through emotions, right? It's a process. It's something you do with the therapist. So I wish I didn't have to answer questions like this because it's almost too tragic to imagine or to bear. But that's my thought and that's my answer. And don't punish yourself if you leak a little bit. And don't punish yourself if you have to withdraw a little bit. Let that be a signal that you need help, that you need help. Right? That's what we forget, is that we're the ones who need help. You show up to this, all of you, because you need help. You don't show up to this because, you might show up to this in the beginning to get answers to help your child. That's the ticket that you buy. But really what happens through this process is you get what you need. This stuff I teach you is not for your child. I don't think it's helpful in most cases, almost all cases, to go back to the child and to tell them what I said or what the therapist says or what the self-help book says. Those are for you, right? And when we're taken care of, when we're at a baseline, the goal of a parent is to co-regulate with the child, to take in the child. This is what attachment is. You take in the child, their distress, their issues, what they say, what they think, what they believe. You take it in. You metabolize it. That's the closest way to describe it. You digest it. You get help if it's a lot from somebody else or other people. And then you reflect back to the child a sense of okayness. And you still act with you're still informed with what they told you if something's concerning, but it's not in the driver's seat. You're not responding from fear. Fear is not driving things. It just now is, you are informed by your fear. And it's not taken hold of your brain and prevented you from accessing the higher levels of your brain, which are creative, thoughtful, intelligent, problem solving, that part of your brain. You manage the fear, you take care of the fear so it doesn't hijack those parts. Somebody says, next question, I'm overwhelmed. My husband has been diagnosed with, I don't know this disorder. It says Lewy body dementia. I don't know that. I'd have to look it up. I'm sorry. But I'll just read it as dementia, and hopefully that gives me the picture. My husband has been diagnosed with dementia. He was an absentee dad to our son. I'm with him, but so angry. I don't want to lose my son. You know, sometimes this job is humbling because I don't have a magic wand or a solution. All I have is myself, and when parents, or in this case a wife, a spouse, is struggling with multiple stressors, multiple real stressors, um, I can just be with you in your unsolvable problems. I can show you hopefully some compassion, some love. Hopefully, I really do hope that one of the things that happens in these broadcasts, either live or the recorded versions, is that you're hearing an authority figure with a few letters behind their name and a few years of practice under their belt telling you that I'm in this with you. Their family relationships are the hardest thing on earth. Ram Dass explained that when he said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. And our children are our greatest loves, our greatest blessing, our greatest joy, and sometimes our deepest heartache and our biggest triggers. And you have multiple stressors. I hope you have a therapist. I hope you have other sources of support where you're taking care of yourself. And I'm just sorry. I don't even know if there's a question in there. I'm just sorry, and I don't know you. I don't even know the name because um it's confidential. But I'm just sending you love, and thanks for letting us know. Get support, like my daughter shared recently at a parent support group. Breaking free of the dysfunction of her family of origin, which is me, brings a lot of guilt with it, and so she goes to therapy to get help carrying the guilt. And so you need help carrying your burdens too. And that's why psychotherapy, in my opinion, is more about listening than it is about talking, especially more about listening than it is about confronting, right? And the heaviness that a good therapist carries is the pain and trauma of the client. It's easy to talk. It's easy to dole out solutions, advice. But we listen, and we listen to provide you with something different than you've received. Yes, there's opportunities for teaching and principles and feedback. That can all be there, but the heavy stuff is the listening. Somebody writes, any recommendation for what types of things to do or not for the first home visit pass for 4 days? My son has not been home since May. He was at Wilderness for 3 months and at a therapeutic boarding school since September. We are just told to spend 80% of the time with family and 20% of the time can be with his friends. His issues are emotional regulation, instant gratification, resiliency, and addiction. We are to gauge how he does with us given that he has been volatile with us in the past. I mean, the 80-20 rule it's a nice benchmark it's practical. I don't have any opinions about that one way or the other. And yes, there's a large part of this that's about how he does, and thank you for sharing with us his issues, and you can kind of watch that. But remember, when you're doing this work, it's also an opportunity to see how you do. Somebody asked me recently, I don't know the exact question, but something along the lines of, when a parent gets it, when a client gets it. And then there was another part of the question that I can't remember. And I told them, and I referred back to an old story. I said, it was on a podcast. I was doing an interview with somebody. I said to them, what I really love to hear, what brings me joy, is when a parent shares with me a struggle that their child is having, even regression, old behaviors, old patterns. And they tell me that story, but then they say, that's not the point of what I'm telling you. I responded differently. And I'm proud of myself. And I was not triggered, or I was triggered at first, but I took a break and I responded in a different way. The only thing you can do for your child is work on yourself. That's the only thing you can do. In this same podcast that I'm telling you about, where I spoke to this issue, one of the questions they asked me was, what would be the if you could buy or if you could have for free a billboard on Times Square for parents, what would you have it say? And there's several people who've said it different ways, and I chose the author Anne Lamott. I said I would use her quote, and I would say that the greatest thing, the most profound gift we can give to our children is our own healing. And by the way, the research is clear. It doesn't even matter if your child doesn't have a mental health issue or you're not an Evoke client. It's universal. It's across all socioeconomic groups. It's across all cultures that gets studied. It's attachment research. If you want a reference, read Parenting from the Inside Out by Daniel Siegel, perhaps the most known and renowned psychiatrist in the United States of America. Read any of his books, but Parenting from the Inside Out. And it's the same over and over again. You doing your work makes the biggest difference. Not how traumatic your background in childhood was, not how healthy it was, but doing your work, your healing, whatever that is. That's the predictor of your ability to provide a healthy attachment experience for your child, which is the number one predictor of all psychological variables in predicting resilience. We don't have 100%, but we have fairly close to it with attachment research. How much work you've done leads to how capable you are of providing the child a secure attachment, which leads to resiliency. That flow chart, that's solid research. And whatever excuses you're using to justify not doing your work because you're not in distress, you're doing fine, it's just your child who's struggling, it's the same exact struggles that everybody uses not to go to therapy. In the book Addictive Thinking by Abraham Tversky, Abraham Tversky is the author. He says it clearly. He says, all the excuses I hear from the family members of substance abusing, addicted individuals, they have the exact same excuses that their loved one has. It doesn't apply to me. I don't need it. I can do it on my own. I'm not that bad. All the same excuses. But you're here, and you being here says that you're doing something. This is not a sign. We don't track it. Nobody will know that you do this or not. So you're here, so you know it. And I just want to reinforce your being here, reinforce you listening if you're listening to a podcast. You're doing what it takes. This is the gift that you give to your child. So that's my thought. Next question. My child's father lives in another country and has never had contact with him by his choice. I don't hold any ill feelings towards him. My son doesn't ask much about him, and I mostly try to normalize the variety of family situations. I know growing up without a father has shaped who my son is, and I don't want to attribute all struggles to the lack of a father. I'm never sure how to balance or how to think about it or support my child as he grapples with those questions. Wow. I have 2 or 3 thoughts about this. Number one, you're not going to get out of this alive. You're not going to win this one. If you push it, you're being too intrusive. If you're passive, you didn't support him enough. So you can release yourself from the idea that you can get it right. The Audacity to Be You, the book that I wrote, the main premise is you can't get it right or win anymore, but you can be a self, which is so much better. So I would relieve you of the idea that you can win this. Now, having said that, I'm not going to just stop talking. Ask him, talk about it, give him permission to set boundaries around it. Ask him what you can do to support. Listen to him, listen to his answers. If he's in therapy or he's in a therapeutic program, you know, hand the baton to them so they can ask those questions, because there's a problem with you, all of you. The disadvantage you have sometimes in talking to your child is you're the parent, and the child will, whether you've asked them to or not, be inclined to take care of you first. And you can imagine all the problems that come with a child taking care of a parent. They'll just do it. It takes a lifetime to learn not to do it. Yeah, just try and be willing to fail. My daughter said, one of her other quotes that I really love. She said, "The greatest gift that we can give to our children is to show a willingness to be a villain in their story." You know, that's really being a parent. When you're willing to be the villain, and I don't mean being a bad cop and being the tough one. I just mean willing to allow and welcome that they're angry, that they didn't think that you loved them enough, that you were, in this case, that you talked enough about the father, or you talked too much about the father. The fact of the matter is, it's your child's problem, and I don't mean that in a dismissive, trite way. But part of growing up is owning your dents and your wounds. I'm the biggest advocate and proponent of the idea that parents dent children. You guys know that if you listen. I'm absolutely on board with that. But when you grow up, the dents are yours. And not having a father does leave a mark. Having divorced parents does leave a mark. Being adopted does leave a mark. Having a parent that yells or works too much, having an anxious parent, all of those things leave a mark. And eventually they're yours to own, to deal with. They're worthy of your attention as you grow up. And if you're lucky enough to have a parent that's doing their work, you can tell the parent about them, and the parent will listen and listen and listen without judgment and without contradicting the facts. That's the ideal. But you might not have that available, and so you've got to find other people to talk to, therapists and friends. My daughter's partner was over a few weeks ago. I'm telling stories about them this week. I probably should ask for permission before I publish it to a podcast. But he was talking about his situation and his relationship with his father, and I simply said, not having a father present in your life, it won't do anything except for affect every single thing that you think about yourself, how you perceive yourself, how you feel about yourself, and all your relationships with other people and your career and friendships. Other than that, not having a father has no impact on you except for those things. And we kind of chuckled about it, but the point I was making to him is it's work. I didn't have a father essentially growing up. I had to learn from my mother how to be a father. She actually spent time, literally, I asked her questions when my first two were young, asking her questions about specific decisions and how to think about them, and even advice. And I've talked about my father's absence, starting in therapy as a young teenager and drug treatment when I was an older teenager, and throughout my young adulthood in therapy, and every once in a while it comes up today. Most of it has been processed, of course. But I've just, as I've grown up, I've just realized the layers upon layers, that simple things. I used to say when I was a teenager, I'm over it. It hasn't impacted me that much, or I've sorted it out. I've accepted his absence. And I believed it. I was very confused why when I was talking about my father in his absence in group therapy, that I was absolutely obliterated with tears. I remember going into this was my first conscious awareness of the power of therapy, specifically group therapy. And I can remember this day. I was 17, going into group therapy at the treatment center, talking about my father. I think we were talking about fathers, and I talked about my father, and I broke down, blubbering, crying. And then I left the group, and I thought to myself as I was going to bed that night, I'm like, wait, I didn't have any conscious feelings or awareness of what was going on. I walked into group and it was like I was a child. I was a young child. And then after group, it seemed to be gone again. I was talking to a friend recently and we were both commenting on there's so much stuff under the surface. When I was training to become a therapist and I read The Drama of the Gifted Child, I put it down after about 30 or 40 pages on my desk and I thought, there's a whole world underneath the surface for all of us, therapists, for all of us people, for all of us clients. And it will take a lifetime to go through that, to grapple with that, to understand it and to deal with it. All right, I'm out of time for this evening. If I have leftover questions, I'll do it on our next one. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I read the second one, The Audacity to Be You, in my voice. If you are a current or an alumni wilderness family, we have support groups each week for you. January 27th, tomorrow night, is that meeting for you. We also have one for alumni only once a month. February 22nd is that time. We also have monthly intensive meetings for alumni of our intensives. You're welcome to attend those if you're an intensive alumni. February 8th is that one. Email malia@evoketherapy.com for more information or to register. If you want to do a deep dive, a springboard into your work, it doesn't complete the work, but it gives you a real good dose of it. Finding You is that program. I can't endorse it enough. I have paid to go of my own. I have gone on my own 9 times. I believe in them. They can be life-shifting and changing and create a whole framework with which to work for many years to come. Finding You, February 23rd through 27th. We also have an online offering. It's a lot less expensive, and of course, you don't have to travel. So January 28th is the next one. Contact intensives at Evoke Therapy for more information about our intensives. We have coaches, life coaches, parent coaches, family coaches that are attachment-based trained therapists that do virtual coaching. So if you're interested in that, contact coaching@evoketherapy.com. We have a Pursuits program, which is a 3 to 30-day program for families or young adults. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. Doesn't matter your issue, doesn't matter your child's issue. We just ask you to try them out. Any combination of 6. Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org are places you can go to find meeting times and even virtual meetings. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are organizations in your local area that offer free services and education and classes. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. And you can also go to SoundCloud.com on your computer and listen there. Or download the SoundCloud app on your Android. You can find Evoke and myself, Brad, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy. You can find our intensives program on Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And our Evoke Therapy blog is curated by Malia. In fact, she has a wonderful submission. She's a wonderful writer and a wonderful human. She's posted one of her own today, so check that out every week. My next broadcast will be February 1st at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about trauma responses, how to recognize them and reroute them. And then we'll go every other one with a Q&A like we always do. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope it was a helpful point of contact. Take care of yourself. Thank you for on behalf of your children for being willing to do your own work and learn. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on February 1st. Take care. Bye-bye.